The late afternoon sun hung low, turning the quiet neighborhood streets a soft shade of gold. The air was still warm, with the hum of distant lawnmowers and kids shouting from a nearby park. A tall teenager walked along the sidewalk, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his basketball shoes untied and tapping against the pavement as he moved. He had just finished basketball practice and was tired, but the kind of tired that felt good, earned. His hoodie was pulled over his head, not because he wanted to hide, but because the fall breeze had started to cool. He listened to music through his headphones, nodding lightly to the rhythm as he walked the same route he'd taken almost every day for the past 3 years. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his mother. "Mom, you on your way home?" He smiled a little, typing back, "Him. Yeah, almost there. Just left the gym." He knew she worried, even though he was 17 and almost 6 feet tall. She was that kind of mom, protective but not overbearing. She worked long hours, and he didn't always understand exactly what she did. But he knew it had something to do with investigations and law enforcement. She didn't talk much about it, and he didn't ask too many questions. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and crossed at the next intersection. A few cars passed, and he waved to a man walking his dog across the street. It was all familiar. His neighborhood, the sidewalks, the same quiet piece of suburban life. Then he noticed something. A patrol car slowed down as it approached the corner ahead. He didn't think much of it at first. Police cars passed through all the time, but this one seemed to linger a little longer than usual. It stopped for a few seconds, then slowly rolled forward again. He looked away and kept walking. The music in his ears muffled the sounds around him, but out of the corner of his eye he saw the same car turn the corner and come up the next street, his street. His chest felt a tiny flutter, a mix of curiosity and unease. Maybe they were looking for someone else. Maybe it was nothing. He turned the volume down and took one earbud out. The car's tires crunched against the gravel on the side of the road as it slowed again. The lights weren't flashing. The siren wasn't on. Just a slow, crawling pace behind him. He checked his phone, pretending not to notice, but his hand was shaking slightly. He thought about calling his mom, but then he laughed to himself quietly. "Don't be paranoid," he told himself. "You didn't do anything wrong." Still, the feeling stayed, the kind of uneasy awareness that comes when you know someone is watching you. He adjusted his hoodie and kept walking, his mind racing even though his steps tried to stay steady. The police car rolled closer. He heard a voice, faint but clear. "Hey, you there, stop for a second." He turned, blinking against the sunlight. 2 officers sat inside, one older, one younger. The older one in the passenger seat had a calm expression, but the younger officer's hand rested on the edge of the open window, like he was ready to move fast if needed. The teenager pulled out his earbuds completely. "Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Where are you headed?" the younger officer asked. "Home. I live right over there." He pointed toward the next block, the row of houses that had always felt like the safest place in the world. The older officer leaned forward a bit. "Mind telling us your name?" He hesitated for a moment. "Why?" "Just routine," the younger one said quickly. "We've had a few reports about someone fitting your description walking around." He frowned slightly. "Someone fitting my description? What does that mean?" The younger officer's face shifted a little, unsure of how to answer. "Just someone in a dark hoodie walking in the area." The teen nodded slowly. "Okay, that could be anyone." There was a pause. The moment stretched awkwardly. The teen could hear his own heartbeat now, steady but faster than before. The older officer finally spoke, his tone softer. "You said you live nearby?" "Yes, sir. Just a few houses down. My mom's home." "All right," the older officer said, glancing briefly at his partner. "You can go ahead." The younger one didn't look as relaxed. He kept watching the teen as the patrol car idled for another second, then finally drove off slowly. The boy let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned back toward his house and started walking again, his mind spinning. He couldn't quite explain why the encounter unsettled him so much. Nothing had really happened. They hadn't yelled. They hadn't accused him of anything. But the way they had looked at him, the way their questions had hung in the air, felt different. Like they saw something in him that he didn't see in himself. He walked faster now. The last few minutes replayed in his head like a loop. The tone of their voices, The way the younger officer's hand hovered too close to his belt, the slight tension in the air that didn't belong there. He texted his mom again. Him. Almost home. He didn't mention the police car. He didn't want to worry her. As he turned onto his street, he saw familiar houses. The blue one with the porch swing, the white one with the barking dog, the tall oak trees that shaded the sidewalks. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. He reached his house and stood at the gate for a moment before going inside. His mother's car wasn't in the driveway yet. She was probably still at work. He unlocked the door, dropped his bag by the couch, and went straight to the kitchen for some water. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He poured a glass and leaned against the counter, staring at the window. The police car passed again, this time slower. He froze. From behind the blinds, he could see it creeping down the street. It didn't stop, but it didn't speed up either. Just moved like it was watching the whole neighborhood. He stepped back from the window, his stomach tightening. He felt strange, part nervous, part angry, part confused. He hadn't done anything wrong, and yet he couldn't shake the thought that maybe that didn't matter. His phone buzzed again. Mom. Working late tonight. Leftovers in the fridge. You okay? He typed back, yeah, just tired. Then deleted it. Rewrote, yeah, all good. Got home safe. He didn't want her to worry. She already carried enough stress from her job. He didn't know the details, but he knew she worked for the federal government. And sometimes she came home late, her expression tight, her eyes tired. She dealt with serious things, dangerous things. He wasn't about to add to that. After a while, he turned on the TV, hoping for distraction. But even as the noise filled the room, his mind wandered back to that short exchange on the street. He wondered what someone fitting your description meant to them. Was it really about a hoodie? Or was it something else? He thought about his mother's advice, always stay calm, always be polite, always keep your hands where they can see them. She'd told him that years ago during a talk he hadn't fully understood at the time. Back then it had felt like one of those be careful out there conversations parents give their kids. But now the weight of her words made more sense than ever. As the evening light dimmed, he walked out onto the porch. The air smelled faintly of rain. The street was quiet again. The same stillness that had been there before, but now it felt different, like something invisible lingered in the air. He sat on the porch steps, scrolling through his phone, trying to shake the feeling. He played some music softer this time. The neighborhood was peaceful, kids laughing in the distance, someone's dog barking. He tried to convince himself it was all in his head. Maybe the officers were just doing their job. Maybe it wasn't personal, but deep down, he couldn't stop wondering why it had felt personal. And though he didn't know it yet, that small, tense moment, just a few questions on a quiet street, was about to become something much bigger. Because sometimes, life changes not with loud alarms or flashing lights, but with the quiet unease of being seen differently than you see yourself. Inside the house, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke his thoughts. He stood up quickly, recognizing the deep hum of the engine. His mother was home. The sound of the car door closing echoed through the quiet street. The young man stood up from the porch steps, his shoulders relaxing a little as his mother walked up the driveway, holding her work bag and a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. Hey, she said softly when she saw him waiting there. Didn't expect you to still be up. He smiled faintly. Practice ran late. She nodded and gave him a tired smile. Her face showed the kind of exhaustion that didn't just come from a long day, but from a long week. She had that calm, steady energy, someone used to carrying responsibility quietly. Everything all right? She asked, sensing something behind his tone. He hesitated, then shrugged. Yeah, just tired. She studied his face for a second, then decided to let it go. All right, she said, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. Go get some rest. I'll be up in a bit. He nodded and went inside, leaving her on the porch. She looked down the street before following him in. The same patrol car from earlier drove past at the far end of the block, its headlights sweeping across the lawns. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dinner. She dropped her bag on the table and hung up her jacket. Her badge and ID rested inside, still clipped to the inner pocket, something she rarely took off even at home. In his room, the boy sat on his bed scrolling through his phone. Social media, Random messages, highlights from the basketball game earlier. Everything looked normal, but his mind wasn't calm. That short encounter with the officers kept playing in his head like a replay he couldn't stop. He thought about how the younger officer's eyes never left him, how the questions felt loaded even when they sounded simple. Where you headed? What's your name? Mind telling us where you live? He didn't know why it got under his skin so much. Maybe because it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like suspicion. And suspicion from someone with authority had a weight to it. Downstairs, he could hear his mother moving around the kitchen, putting dishes away. The familiar sound usually comforted him. Tonight it didn't. He got up, walked downstairs, and leaned against the counter. "Mom," he said after a moment. She looked up, still holding a plate. "Yeah?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Do cops ever stop people for no reason?" The question made her pause. She set the plate down slowly and looked at him carefully. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "Nothing, just, it happened earlier, that's all." Her expression changed. She wiped her hands with a towel and leaned against the counter too. "Tell me what happened." He explained it slowly, how the car followed him, how they asked questions, how he didn't do anything wrong. He left out some details like the nervousness in his voice or the way one officer's tone made him feel small. When he finished, she was silent for a few seconds. Then she asked, "Did they touch you? Threaten you?" He shook his head. "No, just asked questions. Did you raise your voice?" "No." "Okay." She nodded slightly, her tone calm but firm, the kind of tone that came from years of handling situations with care. "You did the right thing by staying calm." He nodded but looked frustrated. "It's just, I didn't even do anything. I was walking home. Same street I walk every day." "I know," she said quietly, "and that's what makes it hard sometimes. People don't always see you for who you are. They see what they expect." He looked down, trying to process her words. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "Next time, if that happens again, call me right away. I don't care where I am or what I'm doing." "Understand?" He nodded. "It," she smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Now eat something before you go to bed. You're too thin for all that basketball." He laughed softly, grateful for the change in tone. But after he went upstairs, she stayed in the kitchen, her expression thoughtful. She replayed his words in her mind. She'd been in law enforcement for over 15 years. She had seen too many situations that started small and ended badly. Misunderstandings, misjudgments, moments of fear that turned into tragedy. Her son's story wasn't just another neighborhood encounter to her. It was a warning. She walked to the living room window and looked outside. The same patrol car drove past again, slower this time, its headlights briefly illuminating the street before turning the corner. Her jaw tightened. Something didn't feel right. The next morning was quieter. The smell of pancakes filled the kitchen as sunlight streamed through the blinds. The boy sat at the table scrolling through his phone while his mother flipped pancakes at the stove. "Big game today?" she asked without turning around. "Not really, just practice." "Well, eat up anyway. You'll need the energy." He smiled. It felt like any other morning, and for a while that was enough. The strange feeling from the night before began to fade. But later that day, when he walked home from practice again, that uneasy feeling returned. He noticed a police car parked at the end of the block, different officers this time. It was probably nothing, just coincidence, he told himself. Still, he pulled out his phone and texted his mom. "You still at work?" She replied, "Yes, why?" "Nothing. Just checking." He slipped the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. He could see his house now, just a few houses down. The sound of a siren echoed faintly in the distance, not near, but enough to make him tense for a second. He was just about to turn into his driveway when a voice called out behind him. "Hey, can we talk to you for a second?" He turned. 2 officers stood near the corner. One of them gestured for him to come over. He felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his voice calm. "About what?" "Just some questions," one said. He looked toward his house, then back at them. "I live right here. My mom's inside." "It'll just take a second," the officer said, stepping closer. The boy took a small breath, steadying himself. "Can I ask what this is about?" The officer looked at his partner, then said, "There have been some reports about a young man in this area. We're just checking things out." He nodded slowly. "Okay, well, I'm just coming home from school." The older officer looked at him for a long moment, then said, "All right." You can go." He turned and walked toward his house, feeling the weight of their eyes on him. As he reached the porch, he heard the faint buzz of his phone again. "Mom, leaving work now. Be home soon." He typed back, "Okay." He didn't mention what had just happened. Not yet. An hour later, his mother's car pulled into the driveway again. She noticed right away the two officers still parked at the corner, talking beside their car. Her instincts sharpened. She stepped out of her car slowly, eyes locked on the patrol car. Her son came to the door, looking relieved to see her. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, "They stopped me again." Her face stayed calm, but inside, her mind was already working. Professional training blending with parental instinct. "Did you tell them who you were?" He shook his head. "No, I didn't want to make it worse." She nodded, then looked back toward the officers. "All right," she said softly. "Stay inside. I'll handle it." He started to speak, but she gave him that look, a mother's look that said she meant business. He knew better than to argue. As she stepped off the porch, the light breeze caught the edges of her jacket, revealing the small badge clipped to the inside pocket. The officers didn't see it yet. Her steps were steady, confident, but not confrontational. She had handled far worse situations in her career. But this one felt personal. The two officers noticed her approaching and straightened. "Evening, ma'am," one said politely. She stopped a few feet away, her tone calm but firm. "Good evening. I live in that house," she pointed toward her home. "I was wondering why you've been parked here for the past half hour." The younger officer looked a little uncertain. "Just routine patrol, ma'am." "Routine patrol?" she repeated, her voice even but sharp enough to make them uneasy. "Is there a specific reason you stopped my son twice in the past 24 hours? The officers exchanged glances. Her badge glinted faintly in the fading sunlight as she folded her arms. "Because if there is, I'd like to know it." Neither of them answered right away. The younger one opened his mouth, but the older one placed a hand on his shoulder as if to stop him. There was silence for a moment. The sound of crickets filled the space. Then finally, the older officer said quietly, "Didn't realize he was your son, ma'am." Her eyes didn't move. "You shouldn't have to realize that to treat him with respect." The officers nodded awkwardly, their composure shifting as they realized who she was. "I'd suggest you move along," she said, her tone still calm. "There's nothing suspicious on this street." They nodded again, got back into their car, and drove off without another word. When she turned back toward the house, her son stood at the window watching. She walked up the steps, and as soon as she reached the porch, he opened the door. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she said, giving him a small, reassuring smile. "Go inside. We'll talk later." He nodded, but even as she smiled, the look in her eyes said something different, something fierce and protective. Because what had just happened wasn't over. It was only the beginning of something that would soon draw everyone's attention. The night air felt heavier than usual. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. The young man sat at the table, staring at the half-finished glass of water in front of him. His mother sat across from him, her jacket still on, her expression unreadable. She had just finished making a few phone calls, her voice low but steady. He could tell from her tone that she wasn't angry. She was focused the way she got when she was working on something serious. He finally spoke. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" She looked up, studying his face. "What's going on," she said slowly, "is that someone thought you looked suspicious for walking home in your own neighborhood. And that shouldn't have happened." He sighed. "I didn't even say anything wrong. I just answered their questions." "I know," she said, "and you did everything right." He leaned back in his chair. "Then why do I still feel like I did something wrong?" Her heart ached at his words. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "Because sometimes people's fears make them see what isn't there. But that's on them, not you." He nodded slightly, though he didn't seem convinced. After a moment, she stood. "Get some rest. I'll handle this." He looked up. "Handle it how?" "Don't worry about that," she said with a small smile. "Just trust me." She walked upstairs to her office, a small room filled with papers, case files, and a laptop. She closed the door and sat at her desk, her mind sharp. Years of training had taught her to stay calm, gather facts, and move with precision. But tonight she wasn't just an agent. She was a mother. She pulled up the local police database using her credentials. scanning through the patrol logs for the past 2 days. It didn't take long to find the entries. 2 stops recorded near their street. Both listed vague reasons, suspicious activity. No details. No evidence. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She made a few notes and sent a quiet message to a contact at the precinct, someone she trusted. Then she shut down her computer and exhaled deeply. Downstairs, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the porch light. She looked out the window once more before heading to bed. The street was empty, calm again. But she knew calm could be deceptive. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains. Birds chirped in the trees outside, the kind of peaceful scene that made it hard to believe there had been tension just hours before. The boy came down for breakfast, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Morning," he said quietly. "Morning," she replied, pouring him orange juice. He sat glancing at her. "You look like you didn't sleep," she smiled faintly. "I got enough. Are you mad?" he asked. "Mad?" She shook her head. "No, but I'm not going to pretend it's fine either." He hesitated, then said softly, "You don't have to do anything. It's over." She looked at him for a long moment. "It's only over when people learn not to judge by appearances." He didn't argue. He just picked up his toast and nodded. That day passed quietly, though both of them carried a quiet tension. She went to work as usual, though her thoughts kept drifting back to the incident. She didn't like unsolved things, especially when they involved her family. In the afternoon, she received a message from her contact at the police department. 2 officers logged your son's stop. Rookie and partner. Miscommunication. I'll look into it. She replied simply, "Thank you." When she left work that evening, she decided to take a different route home, a shortcut through the main road where she could pass the precinct. Her instincts told her to stay visible. As she turned onto her street, she noticed something immediately. Another patrol car parked near her driveway. Her pulse quickened, though her expression stayed calm. Her son was standing on the porch again, hands slightly raised, speaking carefully to the 2 officers who had stopped him before. Her heart dropped for a second, then instinct took over. She parked fast but steady, stepped out of the car and walked straight toward them. The younger officer saw her first, his posture stiffening. The older one turned, and for a brief second both seemed unsure of what to do. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and controlled. "Is there a reason you're speaking to my son again?" "Ma'am," the older officer began. "We received another call about—" She cut him off, her tone still calm but firmer now. "Another call about what?" "Someone walking up to their own house." The younger officer opened his mouth, then froze as she reached into her jacket pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out her badge and held it up. The gold emblem caught the sunlight. Her voice stayed even. "Special Agent Johnson, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hit like a quiet thunderclap. The younger officer's face went pale. The older one blinked, clearing his throat. "Agent, we didn't realize—" "You didn't need to," she said firmly. "All you needed to realize was that he's a young man walking home, not a suspect." The street fell silent. Even the breeze seemed to pause. She turned slightly, motioning for her son to step behind her. He obeyed without a word, his heart pounding. The officer stood frozen, not sure what to say. "I'd like your names and badge numbers." "Please," she said. The older one hesitated, then quickly pulled a small notepad from his pocket, scribbling them down. "Of course, Agent," he said quietly. "Good," she replied. "And I'll be filing a report." "Because this isn't about me being an agent. It's about how you treat citizens. My son included." The younger officer swallowed hard. "We understand, ma'am. I hope you do," she said softly. "Because next time it might not end with a badge." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. She could see the shift in their expressions. Guilt, discomfort, maybe even shame. "Now, if you'll excuse us," she said, turning toward her house. The 2 officers nodded quickly and stepped back. Within moments, their car pulled away, leaving the street empty once again. Her son stood there, still processing what had happened. He had never seen his mother like that. Calm, powerful, and unshakable. She turned to him, her tone softening instantly. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." "Go inside," she said gently. "I'll be right there." He went in, his hand still trembling slightly. From the window, he watched her stand at the end of the driveway, phone in hand, speaking quietly to someone. likely the same contact from before. A few neighbors peeked through their curtains, curious but silent. Word would spread, he knew, but right now none of that mattered. When she finally came inside, he was sitting on the couch. She looked tired but calm again. "Mom," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do all that." She gave a small smile. "Yes, I did," he frowned. "But now they'll think you were just trying to show power." Her smile faded. "I wasn't showing power. I was showing them who they're supposed to protect." He thought about that for a long moment, then nodded. "I didn't know you could talk like that," he said softly. She laughed a little. "That's what happens when you spend years learning how to make people listen." He smiled faintly, though he could still feel the weight of the evening. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, sitting beside him, "we make sure this doesn't happen again. To you or to anyone else." He looked at her, seeing something new in her eyes, not just strength but purpose. She wasn't just a parent anymore. She was someone ready to take a stand. Outside, the street was quiet again. The same stillness, the same calm, but everything felt different now. The air seemed lighter somehow, as if something invisible had shifted. He leaned back on the couch, exhaling slowly. "You think they'll remember?" he asked. "Oh, they'll remember," she said softly, a small smile playing at her lips. "Trust me." They sat there in silence for a while, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the space. Finally, she turned to him. "You know," she said, "when I joined the Bureau, I promised myself I'd protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I never thought one day that person would be you." He smiled sadly. "You still did." She looked at him for a long moment, pride and love mixing in her eyes. Then she reached out and squeezed his hand. "And I always will." The rest of the night passed quietly. No more patrol cars. No more strange looks from the street. Just peace. But neither of them forgot what had happened. And though they didn't know it yet, that moment, when two officers froze at the sight of a mother's badge, would become a story people would talk about across town, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it reminded everyone of something simple, that dignity shouldn't depend on who's watching. And in that quiet house on that calm street, a mother and her son understood that truth more deeply than ever before. The morning after the confrontation, the neighborhood felt strangely quiet. The usual sounds of kids riding bikes and dogs barking were there, but something about the air felt heavier. Word had started to spread. By the time the boy left for school, he noticed the way people looked at him. Some neighbors smiled kindly. Others seemed unsure of what to say. A few avoided eye contact altogether. It was as if everyone had heard about what happened the night before, but no one knew how to bring it up. He walked with his hood down, not wanting attention. The streets he had known all his life felt unfamiliar now. At school, it didn't take long before someone mentioned it. "Hey," a classmate said during lunch, lowering their voice. "Is it true the cops came to your house again?" He looked up from his sandwich, hesitating. "Yes," he said finally. "And your mom? She's like an FBI agent or something, right?" He nodded slowly. "Man, that's wild," the classmate said, shaking their head. "I saw a video. Someone filmed it from across the street." The boy froze. "Video?" "Yeah, it's all over social media. My cousin sent it to me." He felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. He hadn't realized anyone had recorded it. When he got home that afternoon, he pulled out his phone and searched. Sure enough, the video was there. Less than a minute long, but enough to show everything. The officers standing in front of him. His mother walking up calm and firm. Her badge glinting in the light. The officers' stunned faces. Someone had captioned it. "Cops stop teen until his mom shows up. She's an FBI agent." Thousands of comments had already flooded in. Some people praised his mother's bravery. Others expressed anger that it took a badge for the officers to show respect. A few questioned the whole story, asking for the full context. He scrolled through the comments, his stomach twisting. He wasn't sure how to feel. When his mother came home, she already knew. She had received calls from her colleagues and even a few reporters. Her face was calm, but her eyes revealed the stress beneath. She sat down next to him on the couch. "You've seen the video?" He nodded silently. She sighed. "It's spreading fast." He looked at her carefully. "Are you in trouble?" She shook her head. "No, but things like this can get complicated." "What do you mean?" She paused before answering. When something like this goes public, everyone wants to turn it into a story. Some people will focus on what's right. Others will try to twist it. That's just how it goes, he frowned. But we didn't do anything wrong. I know, she said softly. That's what keeps me calm. Over the next few days, the video continued to spread. Local news picked it up, interviewing residents from the neighborhood. Most spoke kindly about the family, saying they were quiet, respectful, and friendly. But the clip kept circulating online, shared again and again. At the precinct, the officers involved were called in for review. It wasn't a formal punishment, just an internal discussion, but everyone in town knew something had happened. For the boy, the attention felt strange. Teachers looked at him differently. Friends either wanted to talk about it or avoided him completely. He found himself sitting alone at lunch, scrolling through messages from strangers. Some were supportive, others were not. His mother noticed the change in him immediately. One evening, she found him sitting on the porch staring at his phone, his expression tired. "You okay?" she asked softly. He shrugged. "I don't know. Everyone keeps talking about it. Some people think it's cool. Some think we made a big deal out of nothing." She sat beside him. "You know what I've learned?" He looked at her. "People always have opinions," she said. "But they weren't there. They don't know what it felt like," he sighed. "It just feels weird being the center of something like this." "I get that," she said. "But maybe something good can come from it." He frowned slightly. "Like what?" "Maybe," she said gently. "It'll make people think before they judge someone. Even if it's just a few people, it's worth it." He didn't answer, but her words stayed with him. Later that week, the police chief reached out to her personally. He asked to meet in person to discuss what had happened. She agreed. The meeting was held in a small conference room at the local station. The atmosphere was polite but tense. The chief apologized sincerely. "Agent Johnson," he said, "I want to assure you this department takes incidents like this seriously. The officers in question are undergoing additional training. It wasn't intentional harm, but it was a mistake." She nodded calmly. "I appreciate that. My goal isn't to create conflict. I just want to make sure what happened doesn't happen again." He agreed. "We'll be reviewing our patrol procedures." The conversation stayed professional, but beneath it, there was something deeper, a quiet recognition that change was needed. Afterward, she drove home feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The weight of the past week pressed on her shoulders, but she knew she had done what she could. At home, her son was in the living room, doing homework. He looked up as she walked in. "How did it go?" She smiled faintly. "Better than I expected." "That's good," he said softly. She nodded, taking off her jacket. "It's not over yet, though. The story's still out there. People are still talking." He set his pencil down. "Do you wish it didn't happen?" She thought for a moment before answering. "I wish it hadn't been necessary," she said quietly. "But I don't regret standing up for you." He gave a small smile. "You looked pretty cool in that video." She laughed lightly. "That's one way to look at it." The next morning, the story reached national media. News anchors discussed it briefly, an example of how quick assumptions could go wrong. Commentators debated professionalism, race, and respect. It was strange for the boy to see his own street on TV, his mother's calm voice captured in that brief clip. But something else started to happen too. Messages began arriving from other families. Some shared similar experiences, moments when they had been judged unfairly or treated differently. Some thanked his mother for staying calm and setting an example. Those messages touched her deeply. One evening, she showed a few of them to her son. "See this?" she said, handing him her phone. "This is why I don't regret what happened. People are paying attention." He read through the messages quietly. Some were long, emotional letters from strangers who had gone through the same kind of fear and confusion. Others were short notes of support. "It's weird," he said after a while. "I didn't think anyone would care." "People care more than you think," she said softly. "Sometimes they just need someone to remind them they're not alone." Days passed, and slowly the buzz around the story began to fade. Life returned to its normal rhythm. School, practice, quiet dinners at home. But things weren't exactly the same. Something had changed, not just for them, but for the people around them. Neighbors stopped by more often now, not out of gossip, but out of genuine concern. One elderly couple even brought over cookies, saying, "We just wanted to check in. You both handled that situation so gracefully." Her son smiled awkwardly but appreciated the gesture. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, he and his mother sat on the porch again, just like before. "You think it's really over?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Maybe the attention is. But the lesson isn't," he nodded slowly. "I guess so." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The world felt quieter again, still cautious but calmer. After a while he said softly, "You know, I used to think you had a boring job." She laughed. "And now? Now I think you have the coolest job in the world." She smiled warmly. "It's not always cool, but it's worth it." He leaned back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in days. Peace. The street was calm. No patrol cars. No curious stares. Just the sound of crickets and the gentle breeze moving through the trees. For the first time in a while, he felt like everything was okay. Inside the house, her phone buzzed again, a message from her office, inviting her to speak at a community meeting about trust between officers and citizens. She looked at her son. "Maybe this is how we make a difference," she said quietly. He smiled. "You already did." She reached over and ruffled his hair gently, laughing as he pretended to be annoyed. In that small, quiet moment, everything felt right again. Not perfect, but right. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from big moments or loud victories. It comes from sitting on your porch, knowing you stood up for what's right and taught the world something along the way. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mother and her son knew one thing for sure. No matter how hard life tried to shake them, they would always stand together. A few weeks passed since everything happened, and life slowly started to feel normal again. The video that once flooded everyone's feed was now buried under newer stories. The neighbors had gone back to their routines, and the quiet streets felt peaceful once more. The boy had begun smiling again. He went to school, met friends, and even joined his basketball team back for practice. Still, every now and then, he would remember that night. The flashing lights, the sharp commands, the sound of his heartbeat in his ears. It wasn't something easy to forget, but he was learning to move forward. His mother, though, hadn't let the moment fade completely. She knew that what happened to them wasn't just about one night or one misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something deeper, something many families had felt but few had the chance to address directly. So when her office asked if she would speak at a community event about building trust between law enforcement and citizens, she agreed. She didn't tell her son at first. She wanted to make sure she was ready. For days, she sat at the kitchen table after dinner, scribbling notes on yellow paper, crossing things out, rewriting lines. Sometimes she would stare into space, thinking about the right words, not just as an agent but as a mother. One evening, her son noticed her surrounded by papers. "What are you working on?" he asked. She looked up and smiled softly. "Just something I've been asked to talk about." "At work?" "Yes," she said. "There's a community meeting next week. They want me to speak about what happened and about how we can do better." He leaned against the counter. "You're really going to talk about it?" She nodded. "I think it's important. People need to hear more than just headlines. They need to see that change can come from real people, not just news clips." He nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Can I come?" "Of course," she said with a small smile. "I'd like that." The day of the event came quickly. It was held at the local community center, a wide hall with folding chairs lined up in neat rows. The room filled with all kinds of people, parents, teenagers, police officers, teachers, even a few local reporters. As she stood backstage waiting for her turn, she felt her palms grow warm. It wasn't nervousness exactly. It was the weight of knowing her words mattered. Her son sat in the front row, quietly watching. When she looked at him, he gave her a small nod, and that was all she needed. When her name was called, she walked to the podium. The room grew quiet. She began simply. "Good evening," she said. "I'm here tonight as both a law enforcement officer and a mother." Her voice was calm, steady. "A few weeks ago, my son and I went through something that many families fear. It was a moment of misunderstanding that could have gone very wrong. I want to talk about that. Not to point fingers, but to talk about what we can learn from it." The room stayed silent. Even the people shifting in their seats earlier were now still. She told the story gently, without anger or drama, just honesty. She spoke about the fear her son felt, the shock she experienced seeing officers treat him as a suspect first, and how everything changed when she revealed her badge. "I shouldn't have to wear this badge," she said, touching it lightly. "For my son to be treated with respect. Respect should be the starting point, not the reward." She paused, letting her words settle. "But I also want to say this. I've worked with good officers all my life. I've seen courage, compassion, and integrity every day. We can be better. We can listen more, assume less, and remember that behind every uniform and every hoodie, there's a person." Someone in the audience nodded slowly. Another person wiped a tear. She continued, her tone gentle but firm. "When I spoke to the chief after the incident, I didn't ask for punishment. I asked for progress. I wanted the officers to understand what it feels like on the other side of the badge. And to his credit, the chief agreed. That's where it starts, with understanding." She talked about training programs, community workshops, and the importance of teaching young people and officers alike how to communicate respectfully. Then she ended with something that surprised even her son. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said softly. "It means giving people the chance to do better. And that's what I hope we all do. Better." When she finished, the room broke into quiet applause, not loud or showy, but heartfelt. People stood clapping respectfully. A few officers walked up to her afterward, shaking her hand, thanking her for her words. Her son watched all of it, a mix of pride and awe in his eyes. He had never seen his mother like this before, not just strong but peaceful. On the way home, they didn't talk much at first. The night air was cool, and the streetlights glowed faintly on the road ahead. Finally, he said softly, "You were amazing." She smiled. "Thank you. I think people really listened." "I hope so," she said. "That's all I wanted." He looked out the window. "Do you think those officers ever saw what you said?" "Maybe," she said. "And if they did, I hope they understand that I don't hate them. I just want them to see what I see. A kid who deserves to come home safely." They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they pulled into their driveway, she turned off the car and looked at him. "You know," she said softly, "what happened that night? It scared me more than I want to admit. But I'm proud of how you handled it. You stayed calm. You didn't lose control." He shrugged slightly. "I just did what you always told me. Stay respectful, stay alive." Her heart clenched hearing that, but she reached over and squeezed his hand. "And you did. That's what matters." Over the next few days, life went on quietly again, but something inside both of them had changed. He walked a little taller now, not out of pride, but out of understanding. He knew the world wasn't perfect, but he also knew that good people could make it better. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, he asked, "Do you think things really change, Mom?" She thought for a long moment. "Not all at once," she said, "but every honest conversation helps. Every kind act matters. Every time someone chooses to listen instead of judge, that's change." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "I guess that means what you said really mattered." She smiled. "Maybe, but so did how you handled yourself that night. People saw strength in that too." He looked at her, surprised. "Me?" "Yes," she said warmly. "You showed the world what calm courage looks like." They both laughed softly, and for a moment, the heaviness that had hung over them for weeks finally lifted. Later that night, she received an email from the community center. They wanted to organize a youth program inspired by her talk, bringing teenagers and police officers together to share stories and build understanding. She read the email twice, her eyes bright with hope. Her son peeked over her shoulder. "They're doing a program?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "And they asked if you'd help." "Me?" he said, surprised. "Who better?" She replied gently. "You lived it." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think I want to." The following month, they both attended the first meeting. It wasn't big, just a few families, a few officers, and some students, but the room was full of honesty and compassion. People shared stories, some difficult, some inspiring. For the first time, everyone seemed to be listening. When it was his turn to speak, the boy stood up and said quietly, "I used to think all cops were against us. But I learned something. There are people who want to change things, and I want to be one of them." The room grew silent for a moment, then filled with gentle applause. His mother watched him with pride, her heart full. She realized that what began as a frightening night had turned into something far greater. a reason to bring people together. Weeks later, when life fully settled back into rhythm, she found herself sitting on the porch again, watching her son walk home from practice. Same hoodie, same path, same calm stride. A police car passed him slowly, but this time the officer waved. Her son waved back. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling tears sting her eyes, not of sadness but of relief. The world hadn't changed overnight. But in that small, ordinary moment, it felt just a little brighter. And sometimes that's all it takes. One family's courage, one honest voice, and one moment of understanding to start something better.